All right, Cynthia, I'm going to let you take this one away. You are probably one of the most well-versed and knowledgeable people on this topic in the entire world, in the U.S. And so, educate me. Talk to me about why this is a myth that is perpetuated by specifically the marijuana industry, that hemp is unregulated.
I don't know about specifically the marijuana industry. I would say
those are typically the people that I hear
the marijuana industry.
Okay. Fair enough. I'll concede that.
So at the federal level, we've got the USDA Farm Bill 2018, which is, being the renewal of which is being negotiated right now. This video is going to focus on state regulations because what we hear all the time from the marijuana folks is that hemp is unregulated, but marijuana equals the regulated cannabis space, and nothing could be further from the truth. So, marijuana, federally illegal. We didn't come up with the definition. The U.S. came up with the definition, the difference between hemp and marijuana. So, right out of the gate, hemp is a legal product. It's legal. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Correct.
State regulations abound. So I will just read real quick the states that have regulation for hemp products, whether they're good or bad, but they have them. Louisiana, Texas, Tennessee, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Alabama, Utah, Arizona, West Virginia. So New York has regulation for hemp. Virginia has regulation for hemp. Minnesota has regulation for hemp. Then other states that just suck have regulation that is so restrictive that it just hands the market to marijuana. Washington State, Oregon, Washington, D.C., Michigan, New York. I said New York twice because it's in both camps. California, Massachusetts, again, Minnesota. They have regulation, but they're just handing everything to the marijuana side. And then we have states where the marijuana people are pushing. There's not any hemp regulation right now, but marijuana folks are pushing to eliminate the industry. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Missouri, Illinois, Arkansas.
Got it. Okay.
Talk to me like a state like Texas. What are the regulations on the books?
Again, regardless of what's going on right now, we have to give Texas a lot of props for coming out with regulation for consumable hemp products in 2019. So they were like one of the first states. They require full panel testing. They require links to QR codes or links to certificates of analysis so that consumers can see what was tested and what's in the products. They require full ingredient disclosure. They require registration with the state so that they can go and do a random inspection of a business if that's what they need to do. You only need like 4 or 5 things to ensure a safe consumer product, and Texas has almost all of them. Yeah.
And the thing that's missing?
The thing that's missing is an age gate, which we voluntarily do, although I do believe there should be an exception for veterans between the ages of 18 and 21. So we do 21 and over. And child-resistant packaging is not a requirement, even though we do use child-resistant packaging. And most recently, the thing that came up was location of hemp stores or stores that sell hemp.
And then how common are those laws in other states?
A variation of all of those things exists in every regulated state. In all those states that I read off before, a variation of that exists everywhere. Some of them go overboard and added a bunch of stuff that doesn't help anybody. So this is the thing, when you're looking at regulation and you're making a decision, is this good regulation or not good regulation? The question you have to ask yourself is, does the requirement that I'm reading support consumer safety? And if it doesn't, then it's a money grab or a land grab or something like that.
Right. Yeah. And then so why would you say that like a 4 milligram cap is a bad or is over-regulating?
Well, so I think Iowa came up with that 4 milligram cap and 40 milligrams per package. Number one, that's not how the industry does anything. Everybody does everything in multiples of 5. So right off the bat, they screwed the entire industry because now you have to repackage and all of that stuff. And I did a panel while I was in Las Vegas, and we talked about consumption and how many milligrams somebody needs. We talked about it we've talked about it recently in terms of like working out and that kind of thing, but everybody is different. So if you're going to make regulation, you need to look at what is the industry already doing. I mean, why would you like pull a dick move, like coming up with requirements that nobody else is using? So now you're forcing businesses to come up with state-specific sizes and packages that are no good anywhere else in the country. So that's why it's bad.
Is there any correlation on states? Now we're looking at a chart. Is there a correlation on the states with how they are represented, I guess, politically?
Yes. So the map that we're looking at right now is from the Center for Politics, and I'm sure Lewis will put a link to it. And so basically it just tells you if the Democrats or the Republicans, if they have both chambers, if it's split, if it's, one or the other, whatever. Okay. So overwhelmingly in states that are red, meaning more conservative leaning states, they have put in hemp regulations. It is Democrat states, blue states, that have beaten the shit out of the hemp industry and largely either banned it or regulated it the hell out of existence. Hawaii, you can add Hawaii to that. So for whatever reason, conservative states don't seem to want to obliterate the hemp industry. And we can talk about Texas. Texas is a very conservative state, not, Austin, which is the blueberry, but in the middle of the state. But Texas is a handful of legislators that are looking to do that. It's not that there's this concerted effort by the marijuana industry, Texas original aside. So conservative states lean more toward, let's just put regulations around this so people can do business, because conservative states are much more concerned about business than blue states, than liberal states. And you can actually see that when you look at, for example, tax maps. So Illinois, New Jersey, California, Washington, some of the most heavily taxed states in the country, right? Texas, one of the least taxed states in the country. Florida, one of the least tax states in the country, South Carolina, Georgia. So there is a definite, regardless of what side you are, whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, whatever side of the aisle you're on, there is a definite pattern and trend in terms of how they address juggling both the marijuana side and the hemp side.
And why do you see that? Like, what do you think that is?
Well, and I mean, Lukas can talk more about this in a minute. Back in the day, when we always talk about the hippie activists that were pushing for cannabis or marijuana legalization, because it was just called marijuana back then, when they were pushing for that legalization, it was all these hippies and, whatever, and they tended to lean more liberal. Free drugs, don't put people in jail, whatever, that kind of thing. And it has continued in that vein, but it's been perverted into the only thing that we can have is marijuana. So the people who've inherited that, because this started like 60 years ago, the people who've inherited that mantle, right, they're still on the liberal side, but it's only for marijuana now. Hemp has to go. So to your point, and you get in some fights with people all the time about being prohibitionists, those same people are, and you should explain why they're prohibitionists.
Yeah, if you are anti-cannabis, whether it's hemp or marijuana, you're a prohibitionist.
Well, this is the thing, though. They don't see it that way. They're like, no, I'm pro-cannabis. Hemp is not part of cannabis. You see that all the time.
But it is.
I know it is.
So hemp and marijuana, again, I say that, I feel like I say this every video, but I'm going to keep saying it. Hemp and marijuana are the same plant, right? It's all cannabis sativa. So if you are saying a part of the plant should be illegal and another part should be legal, you're a prohibitionist.
I don't know if you ever watched, maybe you did, The Wire. Did you ever watch that show? Okay, it's a great show. Anyway, there's a scene in there where this.
I love The Wire, by the way.
Yes, so you may remember this. There's a scene in there where the security guard is dealing with one of the gangsters, and he's telling him not to do something, or the security guard is telling the gangster not to do something, and the gangster says, "You want it to be one way, but it's the other way."
You want it to be one way, but it's the other way.
And that is what we have here. They want it to be that it's just marijuana. That's the only thing. But no, it's the other way. Hemp is part of cannabis, whether you like it or not.
Well, what's really interesting, you've got Oklahoma, who's a fairly conservative state. I would say pretty far-leaning conservative state.
Yes.
But they have medicinal marijuana. They tried to get recreational. It failed. What's interesting about Oklahoma, though, is there's not really any large MSO players within Oklahoma.
Correct.
You don't see Trulieve. You don't see some of the normal players that you see in these markets. You don't really see them operating in Oklahoma. I'm actually curious why.
Because Oklahoma issued a bunch of licenses, and the MSOs want monopolies.
So that's very fascinating. So I guess I didn't really think about it in that context. Because of the, at one point I've heard Oklahoma had almost 10,000 licenses issued for growing, for distribution, for manufacturing, all these retail, all the licenses combined was like 10,000. That is a lot of licenses for the amount of registered adults to consume marijuana in Oklahoma. That would make sense that the large MSO players don't really want to operate in that market because it wouldn't be financially lucrative to them. It's massively competitive. It's probably, I would argue, the most saturated and most competitive marijuana market in the entire country, which, some people can argue that it's bad or that it's good, but I'm always a big fan of free market. And what's interesting about Oklahoma is now we're starting to see a lot of the companies, Oklahoma's now trying to pass legislation around THCA and around other hemp stuff.
Oh, they did it.
And so now you're seeing a lot of players within Oklahoma, because of the saturation, because of what's happened, a lot of these companies are switching to hemp to literally stay in business.
Yes.
The amount of licenses that have been removed from companies going out of business or just improper licensing or a variety of different things, but the amount of licenses that have been removed in Oklahoma is a lot. There's also been a lot of companies that have gone out of business. At one point, in Tulsa, I remember being able to stand at one street corner, and within visual distance, I could see 5 different dispensaries just standing on a street corner.
Oklahoma is a
crazy.
great example, though.
There's more dispensaries than there are fast food places in Oklahoma. It's up there. It's up there.
Chinese triads aside, because I know that's a whole other issue, and a lot of things happened in Oklahoma or are happening in Oklahoma that aren't great.
There's some sketchy stuff.
But Oklahoma is a great example of a free market.
Correct.
Right? They issued a bunch of licenses and they were like, go to town. And so some people went out of business because they couldn't keep up, or there was just too much competition. They didn't distinguish themselves from the competition, and so they just gave it up. But they're a great example of a free market.
And I will say the companies that have ended up sort of being strong within Oklahoma, it make very good products.
Yes.
They're very good companies. Their products look great. They're doing the right stuff. The market has really gotten rid of or purged a lot of the companies that were sort of fly by night, just trying to make a quick buck and not really caring about, the end consumer. The products that have sustained and the companies that have sustained in Oklahoma are great products. I like that market. I think it's a wonderful cannabis market.
The MSOs, like the big companies, they are not in Oklahoma, to my knowledge, because what's the point? There's too much competition, and they don't like competition. As a matter of fact, the MSOs are like that jealous guy who wants to date you, right? But you can't see anybody else. It can only be him. It can only be that guy who's probably abusive too, because you just get that vibe. That's the MSOs.
Just so we're clear, I'm not a prohibitionist. I think marijuana and hemp both have their places. I'm pro-cannabis. I'm pro-everybody.
Yes.
What I have a problem with are MSOs like Trulieve out of Florida, where they are trying to pass laws that make it so nobody can consume any other product but their products.
Correct.
That I have a problem with. And that, to me, when somebody is trying to, commit an atrocity like that, because I believe that's what it is, that in itself is acting in a prohibitionist way. So when I call people out, and if I've called you out for being a prohibitionist, you probably said something that was along the lines of hemp shouldn't be legal, or even marijuana shouldn't be legal. I've called people from both sides prohibitionists, and there are people in hemp that want marijuana to go away, and I don't agree with that either.
Agree. Yeah, it should all be legal.
Correct. I'm
should all be
pro
legal.
cannabis sativa.
Yes.
And so whatever the end game is that looks like, that's what I am a big fan of, and that's what I believe is the best thing for humanity.
So you have to ask yourself, why, other than the sunk cost fallacy that people have, right? Because, they've sunk, truly $50 million on a ballot initiative.
Just this single
year.
ballot initiative.
Yes.
Just for this year.
$50 million so they've put a lot of money into this industry,
Yeah.
so they need to support it. But you have to ask yourself, why would people support companies that want to be the only ones? They want to be the monopolists. Why would you support those companies?
Most consumers, I don't believe, understand the nuanced details of what's
That's
going on
true.
behind the scenes.
That's true.
Right? Like, if I wasn't in this industry, I'll be blunt, I probably wouldn't understand what Trulieve is doing or why they're doing it.
I have a good friend who still lives in Florida, and I was talking to her over the weekend, and she had just come back from Washington State, and she was asking me how's work, whatever. And since she lives in Florida, I was talking to her about the ballot initiative to legalize recreational, and she's like, well, that's good for you, isn't it? She's like, that's just opening up the industry. Yeah. She didn't realize the difference. And she's like, but Washington State is so great. I'm like, if you're a marijuana company, if you're a hemp company, it sucks balls. So
just to put it into context, if we were to take on the mentality of what Trulieve is essentially doing in Texas,
yes,
we would be setting Texas up to eliminate every other company.
Correct.
Get rid of the medical marijuana program.
Yes.
Eliminate every other company that can potentially sell products in Texas, and make it so only our stores and our products are available for people to consume. That's essentially what they are doing in Florida.
If we were an MSO in Texas, we would eliminate all competition, and we would make sure that the only products you could buy were hometown hero. We're not an MSO, and that's not our mindset, but that is what MSOs do.
Yeah, and just so we're clear, MSO stands for multi-state operator. They're typically publicly traded, even though the U.S. stock market doesn't allow cannabis to be publicly traded. Marijuana companies aren't. Hemp companies can be publicly traded in the U.S., I believe.
Because they're illegal.
Interesting caveat. A lot of people don't know that. So all the marijuana companies that are publicly traded are traded in Canada.
Correct.
At least all the ones that I'm aware of are in the Canadian stock market.
And how is all that stock doing?
It's in a weird way, I kind of feel like it's monopoly money. The Canadian stock market and the cannabis, the marijuana stocks, it's a very weird thing that I stay away from that.
Well, I do love Ryan Reynolds, so there's that. But they're called MSOs, multi-state operators, because marijuana is federally illegal, so these companies can only operate in whatever state has legalized marijuana
Correct.
Sales.
There is no interstate commerce.
Correct. So they have to set up a new entity in whatever state they want to operate in.
Yeah, and those entities operate sort of in a weird way individually, even though they are owned. Now, it gets weird, like with the Texas medical marijuana companies, the large one that controls most of the market has outside investors, outside money. People don't realize that this is largely investor-controlled companies that operate
Absolutely.
for the single purpose of serving their shareholders making money for their shareholders.
And I'm only going to politics because it lines up with what we're talking about and what these states are doing. But the same progressive or liberal folks who are like, hey, these big venture capitalists and all these are bad people. And hey, support marijuana, which is funded by those people.
Outside of Oklahoma's a weird one, but outside of Oklahoma, largely every state that has legal marijuana in some capacity is represented with the majority of the market controlling licenses that are essentially funded by investors. So you're even starting to see, I'm seeing a lot of comments around states that are doing social equity programs. The second somebody gets issued a license, or the MSOs will come in and fund a minority operator to get the license and then essentially acquire it from them which sort of defeats the whole
I should have
purpose.
gotten a license in some state and then sold it to an MSO for an ungodly amount of money.
I mean, that just seems like the norm these days. It's not. I don't
By the
understand how that's legal or why that works that way.
By the way, the social equity component of marijuana licensing schemes is another version of monopoly, of a monopoly position that the company has. And so you're talking about how it can be subverted.
Well, what's crazy is a lot of the states that are doing the social equity programs for licenses, the reason they're doing it is because they aren't issuing hardly any licenses.
Right.
So they're having to do a lottery for licenses, which if somebody, I mean, I know some states even limit alcohol licenses because they don't want too many, but why would you, if somebody wants to sell a product and it's legal, why would you limit the amount of licenses?
Because they're being influenced by the people who benefit from having a monopoly.
Correct.
That's why.
Correct.
Yes. Anyway, so there are a bunch of states in play, but people have to ask themselves, why do I support this particular company? Why do I support this particular politician or whatever? And these are like come to Jesus moments that people have to have with themselves when they make decisions. People are constantly pointing out to me what a great state Minnesota is for cannabis regulation. It's a nightmare.
What are some regulations that you hear like overzealous hemp people pushing for that you think are a bad idea?
Let me tell you something. There's an expression in Spanish. I'll loosely translated. It means I'd rather die standing than live on my knees.
Can you say it in Spanish?
Prefiero morir de pie que vivir de rodilla. So, arrodillada, whatever. Anyway, so some of the regulations that I hear our own people push for is, well, let's just get a tax. As soon as we're taxed, nobody's going to mess with us. That's a lie. We saw that in the vape space. Other things that they come up with are, I've heard people say 25 and over. And like, where are you getting that from? I had a conversation with somebody the other day who was pushing track and trace. Why would our own people be pushing track and trace? Banning online sales, banning in-store sales. Let's see, requiring background checks for your clerks, criminal background checks for your clerk. This is not a criminal product. It's not illegal. Why, So our own people come up with some really random and not great ideas.
Well, so track and trace sounds like a good idea. Why is track and trace not a good idea?
First of all, we are not the marijuana industry. Marijuana is federally illegal. Cannabis should be legal, but, in terms of cannabis being legal, only hemp is legal, federally legal. So track and trace was put into place by these states that legalized marijuana so that they could make sure that there wasn't stuff going across state lines and that they were controlling this federally illegal product. Hemp doesn't have that problem. Hemp is legal. As long as it meets the requirement of less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC, it doesn't need to be tracked and traced.
Yeah, we don't track and trace anything else. We don't
Correct.
track and trace alcohol.
Exactly. So the idea that we should have more regulation on us because marijuana does is stupid. I said it.
Because marijuana is overregulated.
It's super overregulated, and this is the thing. I have to question the motivation and the intelligence or like where they're coming from of the marijuana space. They keep trying to make things harder for us instead of trying to make things easier for themselves. It's like, wake up. Last time you were in California, did you visit any dispensaries?
Yeah, I always go to Dr. Greenthumb by LAX.
How was it?
Way slower than usual. I was the only person in there.
Holy, you're the only person in it by LAX?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's like 7 minutes away from LAX, but it's a beautiful dispensary. It's, in my opinion, one of the best dispensaries in the country.
So let me ask you, what is your opinion? How do we stop, and I'll call the marijuana space, and just before I say this, the caveat is all these little marijuana operators that are always so happy when something bad happens to the hemp people, like, wake up because you're next, okay? The marijuana people, if they have their way and they wipe hemp out, you're next, little marijuana operators. So enjoy it while it lasts because you're next. Having said that...
Yeah, I mean, Oklahoma's essentially doing a purge right now.
Yeah, well, but it's not the MSOs doing it.
Correct, but it's going to end up at that point.
Yeah. So pretending that the marijuana people are like this big juggernaut, it's like this tank rolling through a town or whatever. How do you think that you get the message across to them to stop and pivot and like work with the hemp industry on these regulations?
It's a conclusion they're going to have to reach on their own. And the problem, like, we use Colorado as an example, right? I'm reading an article about Colorado. Essentially, the marijuana market is just completely collapsing. This is an article from Businesses Are Shutting or Laying Off Workers as Sales Have Plunged by $700 million Colorado market.
Wow.
This article is from June 9th, 2024. This is on Politico. So essentially what happened with the Colorado market is you had a market where people were coming in from other states. I'm sure they were also selling black market to a variety of other states. Nobody likes to talk about that on the marijuana side, but largely at this point, a lot of states, the only reason the marijuana industry still exists is because they are able to sell in the black market, illicit market marijuana. So the problem Denver ran into was now that states around Colorado are legalizing marijuana, people are no longer traveling to Colorado. Right? And it even cites Texas as one of those states with the hemp products that people are no longer leaving Texas to go to Colorado for marijuana.
Sweet!
So, you could probably thank hemp for it. You could thank other states legalizing marijuana in some capacity. It's killed their illicit market sales. It's killed their regulated market sales. It's destroyed the market. So you've got companies going out of business now that had built this industry and these regulatory structures and these tax revenue systems. They built it all on a market that was not sustainable. And so now, as marijuana is becoming more prevalent and hemp products are becoming more prevalent throughout the country, places like Colorado that were originally set up to be sort of the place to go, nobody cares about it anymore. And so there are not enough people in Colorado to sustain the industry the way that they were operating it.
700 million decline in sales is huge.
Yeah, Colorado's not that big of a state.
It's almost $1 billion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would expect we'll probably see something similar in Oklahoma as other states are passing around there now. Yeah.
Well, Colorado's regulations I think are stricter than Oklahoma's. I'm not positive,
But they allow
they
allow out-of-state purchases.
Oh, okay.
Colorado does.
Right. So the point is, boys and girls, that when you think about regulation, it should be good regulation. And the idea that somehow marijuana is regulated, but hemp is unregulated is a lie. And anybody who says that to you is a liar or misinformed. That's the takeaway today.
Yeah, and just to reiterate on the sort of marijuana market side, it just goes to show that, everybody sort of points at marijuana, why don't we just have marijuana? Why do we even need hemp? The marijuana industry in a lot of ways is set up to fail. The way that this industry was initially designed, and Colorado is the perfect example, it's not sustainable. So they're going to have to, in a sense, hit rock bottom regulatory-wise and tax-wise of what does this look like, and possibly have to redo it. But we've also got hemp that fixes all of these issues.
Hemp fixes everything. That's the next T-shirt. Hemp fixes everything.
I'd wear that. That's Cynthia and I's quick take on what is going on sort of regulatory with the different states and why it's a myth that hemp is unregulated. So hopefully that gave some clarity to all of you that were asking more details about that. And thank you for joining us as always, and happy hunting.
I feel like we got a little rambly there.